Hello, everyone, and welcome. In this session, we're going to talk about generative AI essentials for startups. And if you're ever overwhelmed with all of the options and tools and frameworks and models coming out, this is the session for you. This is a good session to start before we start getting into all of the generative AI hands-on tooling and labs and workflows. We want to kind of set up what is generative AI, what parts of it should you care about as a startup, and we're going to go through some cool use cases, don't worry, and I'll leave you with some resources for learning, sample code, interacting with our community. We're very happy to have you on board, so let's get started. My name is Chris Overholt, and I'm a developer relations engineer who works in Google Cloud. I focus a lot on AI and machine learning. I work a lot with customers, and I'm really interested in large language models, taking action, doing information retrieval, doing things. And so before Google, I worked a lot with startups myself. So I know the pains and the speed at which startups need to operate. And so I hope this session is from me to you kind of a cheat sheet or a short list of what do you actually need to build things and deploy things that are generative AI powered for your own startup. So a little roadmap of what we're going to go through today. We're going to talk about why generative AI matters specifically for startups and kind of filter through all of the different products and services that are out there on Google Cloud and beyond. We're going to demystify generative AI. We'll talk about startup use cases and applications. I'll give you an essential toolkit for how to get started and how to think about some of these business problems and technical problems you're trying to solve. Of course, we'll talk about from prototype to deployment and eventually for you, hopefully production. And I'll leave you with some resources. So let's dig in. Imagine you've probably been through this yourself as a customer, or your own customers go through this today, where you have a question. You want to buy a phone or a device from a startup like yourself, or you want to subscribe to a web platform that you might have, or maybe they're a current. User, they're trying to figure out how to grow and expand their use case. So you probably start with a Google search, which ends up on your website, which you may end up the user may end up in your FAQ and your docs. Maybe they end up in forum posts with people that are having the same problem. Maybe that leads them to an issue tracker with a bug, which they then contact support. And as you know, support is trying the best they can, but starting fresh with someone, they may point you back to certain documentation, forums, and you kind of iterate through this. This can take hours or days, right? It's a very manual process. It happens to us all because we have a lot of developer tools and they have a lot of configuration options, or products and services. Are people want to know, is this thing the right for me, and how do I try it? What do I do? But they don't really want to go through this path. So if you think about alternatives to this, and I'll jump right ahead to where the industry's at today. I'll save you the 2 or 3 year timeline. And now we're looking at this problem saying we have large language models, we have generative AI, we have the ability to do things that we couldn't easily do before. They would have taken a research team. Now we can build them over a weekend. So this is kind of interesting. And so what do we build with Gen AI? And I'll talk about the flow in a second, but now imagine instead of a user sort of wandering along, trying to learn about your company, trying to learn about your product, trying to fix a bug, instead, they're interacting with a virtual agent. I've left that very abstract here. We'll get into that in a moment. But imagine if you're interacting with an agent that is a program powered by generative AI, and this agent has a number of tools that it can use. It can look up information on Google, it can look through your publications or documentation, it can even search your forums and issue tracker, right? So these are all things that the user and the customer support agent would typically do. But is there a way we can wrap this all up? And so I think there's two big takeaways for a startup here is LLMs are more than just generating text and auto completion. If you build and think of them as a powerful way to go from structured to unstructured data, and you start to think about how to automate, which I know is really hard to do when you think about all of the dozens of tasks that we do every day, you can end up with something like this, where a user can interact with an agent. And now, instead of trying to scale and minimize that support process, you're actually trying to make it more powerful and reusable. So I really like LLMs. I think that was kind of an unexpected side effect of LLMs, is we all had these ideas in the back burner but didn't know how to bring them forward, and now we do. So let's talk about startups. I've worked at a number of startups, a lot of them in the data science space. I know what it's like working with enterprise customers on tight timelines. And so if you're like me, you probably want to build some really cool tooling. Maybe you spend nights and weekends prototyping stuff, playing around with the latest tools. Then you go back to your job and you're like, oh man, I have to take care of these cron jobs and take care of these shell scripts just to keep the database running. Or there's fire drills, right? Maybe we have an outage. And when we think about DevOps and optimization, like it's always aspirational. And so these are all very real things. And one would think generative AI comes along. problem solved. Not really. We have another problem, but the good news is this: when you think of this problem and it's the tools and problems it can solve, large language models help a lot with content generation. They help put the human touch back into your applications. And honestly, one of my favorite things, especially for startups, is whatever you can draw and design now, it's very easy to take and implement that. Whereas previously, you would have had to design schemas and thousands of if statements in a chatbot just to have something that seemingly was able to take care of complex problems like what you're facing in a startup. So, what are real startups in the world doing today? Don't take my word for it. There's a really cool blog post on the Google Cloud blog called, I think it's actually changed now from 101 to 301. There's a link at the bottom. These are all real customers of Google Cloud, big and small. And I've actually called up some startups that caught my eye when I was looking across this. And in this blog post, we looked at Google Cloud customers and talked with them and said, hey, what are you doing with AI and generative AI and agents? You can see some of those examples here. I put these here because it's too easy to read blog posts and social media and say, oh, there's a cool new thing out. But it's really just, people like me looking at the technical bits. What are businesses actually doing today to solve the problem? So you can see things like drug discovery, analyzing financial health, solar panel quotes, and those all sound very aspirational. And especially if you're just starting out as your startup or you're just starting out with generative AI. But I promise you, by the end of this session, you'll know what technical stack goes behind these, and you'll know how to prototype something like this in a day or days instead of weeks and months. So if you want some inspiration, take a look. These are broken up by market segment and industry. So take a look through these use cases, get some ideas, maybe find one or two that really mean something to you and where your startup is. And as you go through this session, you can see how to actually make that come alive. So before we get into architectures and tools, we'll just level set. I promise this won't be a detailed overview of generative AI, but let's put it in context. So what is generative AI? We all know that generative AI involves large language models, probably something with RAG architectures, which we'll get into later, which is really information retrieval. You've probably seen some kind of chatbots. You may have seen generative images. So all of these things are APIs that you can use that either like probabilistic word generators or image generators, embeddings, all of this stuff. Why are we using it? I think it's to scale and help create more content, and it's also to one of the more powerful parts is to convert unstructured language and images and documents into structured data and back again. Why would you do something like that? You'll see later. You can actually do really neat things with information retrieval and taking action. So you don't just have a chatbot that's talking, you actually have a chatbot that's looking up things, that's taking actions, or maybe you don't even have a chatbot. You have an internal backend automation bot or agent that you're using to automate the boring stuff. So you can focus on the exciting stuff. So that's generative AI in a nutshell. And we're going to walk through all of those examples in some use cases later. So before we go in, I like to think about what is a generative AI app. And really, anytime a new technology comes out, there's new words and nomenclature, and we kind of try to map that back to what we know. And I think a generative AI app is an app. From where I sit as a developer and an engineer, just like you, I look at all this and I say, okay, it's code, it's Python code. There are sample notebooks, there are front end apps. I can run some of this stuff in Cloud Run. I can talk to BigQuery. So a Gen AI app is an app. And you might see a lot of really cool blog posts. There's such amazing work going on in Google Cloud DevRel, in our community, Google Cloud community, in the open source world. So when you look around, you might see something like an LLM chatbot. Like, is that a generative AI app? You might see retrieval augmented generation. I worked on something like that on the right side there, SQL Talk. So it uses Gemini function calling to talk to BigQuery in natural language, and it actually makes BigQuery calls on the back end. Is that a generative AI app? What about a prompt chain? Maybe if you've worked with LangChain or just a very long conversation with Gemini, you've thought about how to do prompt templating and prompt chaining to be able to do kind of a chain of thought, right? Like first do this step, then this, then this. Or if you're like me with the application on the right, you may have just used function calling and said, wow, this is pretty simple and neat. I'm going to use this and build an app. In my opinion, these are all generative AI apps. It means that you've built an app and you've somewhere inserted generative AI, whether it's for creating content or actually driving the backend logic. So really, when you hear generative AI app, just think app. Try to find the generative part in it. Is it Gemini? Is it a vector database? Is it an agent? And that'll help. So that's the first step in demystifying. Is I think these are all generative AI apps. And I think that they can all be used to solve interesting problems. Now, let's walk through a super short history of the last 2 years. In the early days of 2 or so years ago, there were only large language models, and we sort of interacted with them and said, "Wow, this is really neat." And it sounds like well-written text, even though it's probabilistically generated. So we interacted with the LLMs, and there was a kind of a moment where we said, should we throw away all of our old architecture and just work with LLMs? I think we're over that, I hope. But then we started to find a pattern, and we said, oh, wow, not only can I generate words, but I can introduce this concept of factual information, reducing hallucinations. And so retrieval augmented generation was born. I won't go that into detail here, but there's basically, instead of the previous case where we just send a prompt and get text back, in this case, we send a prompt, we being the end user, could be an employee at your startup, could be your customer, could be you, prototyping something. So the user sends a prompt, and then we do 2 steps in their architecture. We do information retrieval, and then we do information synthesis. And you might have seen this a lot with vector databases and embeddings, multimodal embeddings. You can do this across text, images, audio. So that's retrieval augmented generation. And then I think we're living in this current era of AI agents. And again, all we're really doing is just adding logic and control to this exact same stack, right? So we're able to think about the large language model itself. We're able to think about how we deploy it, what tools we empower our agent to be able to look up things on Google, look up things on Wikipedia, or look up things in a vector database that you manage and host. So it's kind of interesting just to see how this stack has evolved. And I think it's very relevant for startups when you're trying to think of what problem you're trying to solve across what timeline. So we'll get more into that. But I wanted to pause here and say, let's map that to a real Vertex AI architecture. But like, what does the data flow look like? So a really easy way to get started with generative AI in Google Cloud is through Vertex AI. And in Vertex AI, on the left side of this diagram, you'll see there is a Vertex AI Studio. In here, this is a user interface in the Google Cloud Console where you can send and receive text and image and document understanding. You can basically play around with Gemini and see what kinds of inputs and outputs it responds with. You can toggle on settings like grounding, you can set system instructions. And on the right hand side, you'll see some boxes there. So there are filters for responsible AI and safety. There are foundation models. So I've mentioned Gemini a lot, but you can also, through the Vertex AI Model Garden, use things like Gemma, our open models. You can also use things like partner models from Claude or Mistral. And I think there's about 60 plus models in the model garden. So you don't even have to leave Google Cloud and its control plane in order to try some of these different models for that are fine-tuned for instructions or coding or computer use, things like that. And on the right side, as you start to dig deeper in this process, you'll find that, hey, maybe I need to set up evaluation and monitoring, and I need to fine tune a model. So this is kind of the Gen AI stack. And I wouldn't say this at all replaces the previous stack, but it really just combines with and allows us to do more powerful things. So think of this as a new building block for your stack, and we're going to see exactly where it fits in. But that's essentially, when you look at the Gemini API itself, these are ways that you can use it. And as you go through startup school, we're essentially going to start with prompt engineering and then talk about how to deploy an end-to-end app connected to data sources. But we all start from this point because if you're looking to use generative AI in your app, probably a good idea to become really familiar with the Gemini API and see how, kind of what actions you want to orchestrate and what user workflows you want to solve. So now let's take a look at the available products and services in Google Cloud that you need to build and deploy a generative AI app. So there's a developer cheat sheet out on GitHub from a Google DevReller. And so what we can do now for the next 30 minutes or so is walk through each of these 200 plus services one by one. I'll talk about how it works, how you can implement it, pricing, usage, all that fun stuff. No. Actually, I'm just kidding. While it's a really cool cheat sheet for looking across the board, you don't need to know all 200 products and services by name, their short description, and what they do. In fact, if you look a little bit deeper in that cheat sheet, you'll see that a lot of these services are grouped by function. And if you kind of look at the top right of this diagram, you'll see compute and storage, and on the right, AI ML. And in my opinion, you can pick one of each from those bins and actually stand up a fairly impressive app. So remember, as a startup, you don't need to use every service on here just to stand up a generative AI app. In fact, I'm going to leave you with today with a super short list, some of them just one, two, or three services, and you can actually have a very capable app. So let's start over from that huge list of products and services. And we're just going to look at the short list of tools in Google Cloud that you need for your startup. And it happens when you go to the Google Cloud products page, there's a nice header image with kind of categories and popular services. And I actually really like that. I like anytime you're in the Google Cloud documentation or the Vertex AI documentation, or even the Cloud Console itself, anywhere you see a short list of something that's very meaningful. That means, a lot of our customers are using this common service. So just looking at these at the top of the Google Cloud product page, we have Vertex AI for everything AI ML, APIs, data stores, embeddings, all that good stuff. We have virtual machines, one way of doing compute. We have data warehousing and SQL database and object storage, all different ways of storing data. And of course, serverless compute would be coupled with something like Compute Engine as different ways of having a runtime for your generative AI application. So if you sort of blur your eyes and you see, okay, there's AI ML, there's compute, and there's storage, that's something to keep in mind for later. And
Oh, damn it. I mean, speaking, but the mouse was yeah, the micro was on mute. So he's from Texas. I see his the Texas map. Interesting. So I was saying regarding the cloud, you know, especially if you want to study the cloud, there are 5 foundational elements that you need to know: compute, storage, databases, networking, and the security. So these are the 5 foundational elements that you need to know when it comes to cloud infrastructure.
and so the more you learn about these low-level blocks, the less confused you'll be. Like I was when I started in generative AI about what am I looking at? What is this application? How do I break it down into its components? So with Vertex AI, one way that we like to look at this is to say, what's a small stack that you could stand up to solve a business and technical problem? And here's one. There are many, many options. We'll go through some, but I want to give you this framework and you can think about it in terms of generative AI, integrating it into your existing apps, how to build new scalable apps. So for example, let's say we have we want to build an app for our internal employees to ask questions about orders and statuses. So we might have a database already existing, maybe it's in Cloud SQL, and it has all of our operational order information. And then we have additional sales data in BigQuery. We want to join those. We use Vertex AI as kind of a middleware layer here. We can use things like Agent Builder, Model Garden, which are all just agent frameworks or large language model endpoints like the Gemini API. And then we can start to use those tools to dig into and explore our databases, our analytics in BigQuery, and we can pipe that to something like Looker and make some really nice operational dashboards. So probably today you have a stack like this already, or you're working on one, and you might be using data science models from Vertex AI or not at all. You may just be querying things directly from BigQuery or SQL, and that's okay. So this is a great chance to look at, is there something I could do there to make this more powerful for my employees or for my users? So keep this stack in mind. And then as we go on later in the use cases, we're going to start to put together some apps. And I hope this will become a lot more straightforward for you and how to think about piecing these together. So let's talk about generative AI use cases. And I want to walk through 3 use cases that slice different capabilities. I think that a lot of generative AI demos and tutorials today are focused on chatbots, which is great. I think talking and chatting is a very human thing to do, whether you're trying to get support or solve a problem inside of your startup. However, I think not all generative AI has to be a chatbot. So we'll talk about customer support chatbots, but we'll also talk about.
I found it really funny when companies they say, "Oh, we are implementing AI," and then you go to their websites, and it says AI agent pops out, and it's the same as a chatbot. So there is no difference in terms of the functionalities, what they do, it's the same thing. It just said AI instead of chatbots. Chatbot is the same as AI. I mean AI agent. Okay, and there's a lot of companies. They just they just want to appear to be cool, and I don't know, and on the edge by just saying anything is AI when actually it's not AI, when they are not even using AI. For example, my company, we use AI because we need it. It has a use case. It's very important. Otherwise, I started without AI. When the first company, when I bought it, there was no AI. I really needed, because at the time I was thinking about how can I was actually manually summarizing books. So I was looking for software to do summaries of books. Okay. Then when the OpenAI came, I just used their API. Now I don't have to do it manually. Okay. So I use their API, and that will help me really facilitate the task. Okay. And even in terms of the audio, right? I used to do audio, record audios, then then upload them. But right now, I just use a OpenAI API, and it really facilitate the work for me. But some companies, they are not even using AI, but they just wanted to sound creative or advanced. Everyone is saying AI, AI. Okay. All right. I see two people joining. All right, let's watch it. This is a course that I'm watching. Okay, so don't expect me to speak.
Another really big use case for our customers and startups is internal knowledge agents. Is there something that instead of searching Google Drive and Sheets and all of these PDFs and BigQuery, like, is there something that I can just talk to that can help me work better? I also want to talk about one of my favorite things, which is autonomous backend AI agents. And we won't go too deep, but I want to present that pattern to you. So you're not just thinking about chatbots, but you're thinking, there's this really painful backend process, and I really wish we could automate it with an agent. You can absolutely apply everything that we're talking about here to that problem. And the last thing is, this is not just text. Gemini, especially 2.0 and 1.5, do a lot with multimodality. So when you have, it's easy to understand the power of like indexing your entire website and documentation, PDFs, and using that as a data source. But even beyond that, what about screenshots? What about tables? What about videos, audio recordings, podcasts? All the media that you're putting out there in social media. Can you also ingest and work with that? Absolutely. So we're going to talk through 3 use cases that do exactly that. As we're going through these 3 use cases, I like to think of simplified architectures. So let's think about a 3-tier architecture. And here we're going to focus on what's the generative AI tool, what is the compute resource where this thing is running, where's the data coming from. Usually, if you can answer those 3 questions and frame that in terms of a business problem or a technical problem, or hopefully both, you have a very powerful.
Okay, 3-tier architecture, generative AI tools, LLMs, text image code generation, AI agents, OSS frameworks, compute, virtual machines, containers, clusters, data, blob storage, databases, data warehouses. Okay. Okay, let's see.
Powerful toolbox to solve that. So if you take away one thing from this session about what should a startup care about in Google Cloud, use this lens to, anytime you see something new and cool, break it down and kind of, it doesn't have to be perfect, but kind of get an idea of where are they running it, where's the data coming from, what tools are they using. These tools could be the Gemini API, They could be AI agents. They could be open source frameworks like LangChain or LangGraph. And there's hundreds of other amazing generative AI open source tools. So those are all just things to think about. So keep this 3-tier architecture in mind as we go through these use cases. And I'll keep it on the right side there and put some examples of that. So example number 1, probably the most common example you've seen in generative AI. I won't go into too much detail, but just remember our use case from the very beginning of the session where we said, do you want your user going through 10 or 20 steps to find the answer? Or would you rather have them interact with an agent that can close that loop a lot faster? So generative AI can help automate some of these routine inquiries by basically feeding it information, data sources, not fine tuning, but
the problem that a lot of people have is these things are really, it takes time, right? And a lot of customers, they wanted to talk to someone. You call the company and you have a specific problem and you just want to talk to someone in order to solve the problem. But it's so frustrating when they put you in an automated messages, right? It's so frustrating. It doesn't, the system is so slow, right? And you have to wait instead of just making it easy and just connect to your customer. And right now they are trying to improve that. I don't know, but it's not there yet, right? Even with the AI agent, the system is so slow and it doesn't give you the right answers. Okay, from customer standpoint, it is a bottleneck. It is a completely a frustration. Okay, if it turns out in my company, I wouldn't use AI agents. I would not use it because I have to have people really. If it turns out that my customer are requesting a lot of services, I mean a lot of inquiries, I have to, especially when it comes to something very important, right? I have to make sure I put on people, even if I have to answer the call, right? So you have to do that because customer, they don't really care whether you have a fancy AI or not. They don't care. They want to get a problem solved and move on. They don't want to talk to a bot all day.
rather retrieval sources where it can learn about. So you could say here is a knowledge base, and you can go here to learn about commonly encountered issues. Here's a link to forums, and it can index all of that. So in this stack, you could build something like this very, very easily and prototype it with the Gemini API that's going to handle all of your text generation and internal maybe tool calls, things like that. You could run this on Cloud Run. You could put a front end on it. That could be JavaScript or Python, whatever front end you like. And data would be coming from Google Cloud Storage or data stores. So how would I set this kind of app up? I would first say, let me start in the Gemini API, start with some system instructions of your customer support chatbot at Chris's company, XYZ. You specialize in these things and you help customers with product questions or support tickets. And then you might say, okay, I need to deploy this thing because I obviously can't use it off of my development laptop. So you might take that, put it into an application like a Python web framework or a Python backend and web front end, and run that on Cloud Run or Firebase. Like those are very common options. The data is the important part here because that's where you're bringing in your company and your expertise. And so here you might say, I have 50 different product manuals. I'm going to load them into Google Cloud Storage or GCS. I have our customer FAQ on the website. I want to add that. So you think about, you're just adding documents to a storage bucket, and then something like Vertex AI Agent Builder can help you turn that into embeddings and host that in a data store, which is a vector database. So all of that being said, we could build a customer support chatbot with Gemini, Cloud Run, and a data store. And even though it seems simple, you can build that and start to test it. Would that solve 10% of your customers' problems, or 50% of your customer problems, or maybe 90%? It all depends on where you are as a startup, and wherever you are, it can help. It can help measure, it can help centralize and get metrics on. And it works really, really well alongside your support team. So we have a lot of tools about how to feed these things back, whether it's human in the loop for your support team, or helping the customer get to the next best option out of a bunch. So this doesn't remove your support team.
The reality is, from customer standpoint, they want a human being on the other, on the other end of the line. Okay, even though these integrations are complex and it takes a lot of time, but it doesn't solve the main issue, which is you want to solve a specific. Okay, let's say, why are you getting charged $200 for a payment? So you want to have an immediate answer, and unfortunately, a lot of times they don't have that answer. So you have to, the chatbots, they don't have that answer. Okay, and I find that a lot of times the chatbots are, the answer that they give you are very superficial. It doesn't really solve anything, right? For some reason, the programmer, the reality, they are very out of touch with human beings, and these techies, they wanted you to speak to a robot when the robot doesn't even understand your language, right? So you're trying to, you wanted to know exactly why they're charging $200, and you wanted to speak to someone right now, all right, to solve that problem. And the chatbots are not effective. They are a very frustrating process. So for some reason, it looks like we're putting a lot of resources in something that really, frustrates the customers. So what's the point of that? All right. I think a lot of time people, especially the techies, they don't see it from that perspective. For the human perspective is really important. All right. So if you are an entrepreneur, you need to think about that, that perspective, because a lot of times the programmers, they are not really in tune with human behavior, and they want to isolate people and connect them with chatbots, and the chatbots are not really up to answering appropriately the answer that people are looking for. Okay, all the website, they have chatbots, but they're not effective. And right now they're improving all the agents. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just a waste of time, I guess. How about just hiring someone to answer the questions? How about that? Right? It's much easier, much faster. Sometimes the old technology is actually the best. Not, innovation doesn't really mean is the best product. So you got to keep in mind.
They're actually critical to help build this the right way and evaluate it and make sure it's useful. So that's one example stack. Another use case is, so let's move away from external customer facing chatbot and think about internal employee chatbot. And sounds simple, but it's a huge difference, right? Now you're an internal employee that's trying to, maybe you work in marketing or sales, and you're trying to make targeted content. You're trying to make customized POCs, and you're trying to.
I don't know if you. I think that two people are watching me right now. I don't know if you agree with me, but testing is the worst communication tool I ever seen. Right? I don't. I hate testing. You know how many times you are testing with someone and you say something, and it completely, deviate the conversation into something else, and it doesn't represent accurately how we communicate. Okay, So, okay, let's say if I have a company, yeah. So let's say I want to talk to my sales rep about a specific thing, right? So right now they created Slack, uh, collaboration tools, I suppose, and then everybody's just testing on the Slack, right, or Zoom. Okay, how about take the call and say, "Hey, Tom, what's going on with the sales?" All right, send me the documents. How about that? Instead of just like too much time testing, right? Like this, just it's not effective. Right? Especially I use like uh, I, especially when it comes to technology, I outsource a lot of my work. So and the website, you always have to test. You send messages. The person doesn't understand. You have to rewrite again. You have to rewrite. You send it again for something that could have just taken one call, right? And say it takes 5 minutes. Okay, do this, this, this. That's it. But when you're testing, it takes an hour because you need to explain more. All right? How is that efficient? That's not efficient. That's not efficiency. That's why I regularly request a Zoom meeting. Let's do a video meeting so that we can, we're on the same page, because most of the time it's just some more confusion going on. Okay. So talk to people instead of just testing. Talk to them. It takes less time than spending a lot of time testing all day. Like, I've done it. It's staying two in the morning, sometimes 3 in the morning testing, someone at the other, at the other end of the world. It's not effective. So you have to use the effective ways. The effective ways is video call. All right. A call is effective. Oh, this is how I want. Okay. If they need a specific drawing or design, you send me the design. Okay. But testing, it takes a lot of time. It's very ineffective.
To help customers individually, but a lot of them. And so maybe in this case, you can let the guard down a little bit, meaning you don't have to focus so much on hallucinations, inaccuracies, and all that, because this is not going to a customer, but it's an internal tool, and you can give it access to more internal information than you would an external. So if someone's looking for the reason of why something was implemented or why it was changed, instead of scanning a bunch of documents and issues, maybe they can just ask and they'll get to the right place quicker. So it's really about information discovery and management. So in this case, if you were to build a marketing and sales, let's say an internal chatbot, maybe it takes questions about upcoming marketing events, or maybe it captures information about top 30 customers that are moving along your sales funnel. You could build an app like this that uses the Gemini API, uses Imagine to generate images for marketing, blog posts, social media. You could also use Agent Builder, which is a collection of tools, both high level, low level, low code, no code. So that would be your generative AI stack. You could run this on something like Compute Engine. So you could have a virtual machine where you have some kind of a platform there for your employees to use. And the data could be coming from Google Drive, could be coming from your internal knowledge bases or your content management system. So hopefully you're starting to see little differences and commonalities between the two. And the third and final use case is one of my favorite, because it actually moves away from chatbots and this modality of human says something, machine does something, back and forth. This actually puts most of the control into the application, the generative AI app. So in this case, maybe we can do enhanced product development. And I know a lot of engineers I work with are looking at how do we work better with the design team? How do we do better code reviews? We've even implemented in our developer relation team, we've implemented a Gemini pull request review bot that's actually really, really good. And it's actually freed some of us up from all of the reviewing all the wonderful content that's coming up. And we can go in and check and see, oh yeah, those are all the things I would have covered, plus this one other thing, instead of having to come up with the full code review. It's nice to have assistants like this. So in this case, this would be internal, not for end users, not for external customers. And this would be focused on the product team and the engineering team. You might build something, again, there's so many ways to build this, but you could build something like this with LangChain, LangGraph, which are open source tool calling and agent frameworks out there. You could run and deploy something like this on Kubernetes or GKE if you're already using that. It's nice to have it alongside, can access your services and maybe even query some of your services in real time. And then the data, you probably have data in BigQuery, Spanner, Firestore as a document store. So I wanted to show these 3 use cases, not to give you exact recipes, but just to show you that you can take any use case in any vertical, and whether it's customer facing or internal, and kind of apply this. What's the generative AI? What's the compute? Where is it running? And where's the data coming from? And I think that'll help you demystify a lot of what's out there, because you can fit almost everything in generative AI in one of those bins and then figure out if it's useful to you or not. So here's how you might feel right now, and I feel the same way. You have a Google Cloud AI toolbox, and you keep hearing things in social media and GitHub about the Gemini API and BigQuery and LangChain and evaluation and Model Garden, and it's a little bit maddening, and it makes you feel like you need to throw away your entire stack and start fresh and learn all of this new stuff and start building like a new paradigm. But that's not the case at all. If you think about this 3-tier architecture, and of course, for more complex apps.
Okay, so if you are an entrepreneur, you are building something, you actually don't need all this information. It's not that necessary. So what you need to know is, you need to know, from business perspective, right? You need to know the cost of the APIs, because it's really important. So you need to know, if you are using a specific API, how much it will cost you, and if you have a 10,000, and how much it will scale, let's say. Okay, so you have to be very careful, because APIs cost a lot of money. Okay, and so if you are not careful, you'll be out of business. Okay, so as an entrepreneur, you really need to focus on the cost of the things, right? Because that will have real impact on your business. Okay, because some APIs will cost a lot of money, right? And yeah, especially in my case, the audio API costs a lot of money. So that's the reason why I have to set up a limit from user, from on the user profile, so that the user doesn't exceed that. If the user exceeded, it will cost me a lot of money. Okay, so you have to think of, so you don't need to know all this information. You just make sure that as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's leading the company, you need to know the impact of the cost, because that will really, have a negative repercussions on your company. So it's important that you need to take care of that. But you don't need to learn all of this complex information. What you need to learn is, if you are using AI, especially AI APIs, focus on the cost. Okay, so for instance, right now I use the OpenAI APIs. Okay, but they cost a lot of money, and now we have DeepSeek, which is AI company from China, and it's very cheaper. But I'm looking into it, but I'm not in a rush in terms of just changing it, from OpenAI to DeepSeek, because I don't know exactly how reliable DeepSeek is. Okay, so you got to keep in mind also.
It may not apply, but for where you're at as a startup, if you're trying to build a demo, trying to get to an MVP, trying to scale your solution, whether that's the actual app that you're providing, or your support, or you're trying to scale sales and marketing. Like, all this principle applies to all of those. So as you're looking out in the world of generative AI and on Google Cloud, you can remind yourself, my toolbox, I can actually organize my toolbox. Now I have generative AI tools, and I can use those anywhere that I need agentic reasoning, or anywhere I need content generation, or even synthesis of, I have a business question, turn that into a SQL query, make it, and then interpret the results to me. So that's the leftmost column here, is all about generative AI tooling and APIs that runs on top of the compute, the middle column. I put here things like Cloud Run, which serverless container compute, super easy to take an app, deploy it. Don't worry about scaling, authentication. That's all built in to tried and true product. And it runs generative AI very well. It runs apps just as great as it's been running them for the last decade. Compute engine, of course, you can run this on a VM. GKE, of course, you can run this in Kubernetes. At the end of the day, this is all just client libraries and server-side APIs, right? Client libraries, Python, Java, Go, JavaScript, and the server-side APIs are the ones you know already, the compute and storage, and then these new ones, generative AI. So hopefully by binning these tools in different boxes, you don't just have a mess of tools like how I feel some days, but you have this sort of organized way of saying, oh, that's an interesting idea you have in a prototype. Let me grab 3 things out of my toolbox, a blue bit, a green bit, and a yellow bit, and actually build an app today and tell me if that solves your problem. That's something we could not have done a few years ago. And I think that's one of the neatest parts of generative AI. So at this point, I hope that you've kind of taken away that there are fundamental building blocks in generative AI. There are startup problems that you're trying to solve. If you're like me and you're overwhelmed by the tech, you could just take a step back, take a look at this blog post. This is the one where I showed some customer stories from earlier of how Google Cloud customers are using generative AI. And it's funny, they grew this blog post. It was 101, and now it's 321 real world generative AI use cases. And they're grouped by customer agents, data agents, code agents. Think of these as just business problems that had technical stacks and how to solve them in generative AI. So take a look there for inspiration. Maybe grab 1 or 2 that mean something to you and start building. And that's exactly what we're setting out to do. It means something to you and start building. And that's exactly what we're setting out to do in AI Startup School. And maybe grab 1 or 2 that mean something.
Let's put this on. Got a customer agents, data agents, code agents, right? Creative agents, security agents, employee agents. Got a customer agents, data agents, code agents, creative agents. Yeah, the code agents is really important for programmers, right? If you are coding all the time, so it basically allows you to fix errors, or some agents just give you the whole, coding. If you want to build a specific thing, right? You tell them, and the agent will give you all the codes, and just copy and paste, right? So this is how it's going. And the creative agents is, if you for solo entrepreneurs, you can use that creating a lot of images, a lot of, it could be videos, it could be documents. It will really help because you don't, it just you can do it yourself instead of hiring someone to do it for you. So it really helps in that case. Security agents, yeah, I think it has to do with the internal database, internal backend. Employee agents, I'm not sure about the employee agents, to be honest. All right, let's go.
To you and start building. And that's exactly what we're setting out to do in AI Startup School. The last part of it, before I wrap up, is just to talk about some best practices, because even with this nice mental model of generative AI, compute, and storage, it's still fairly messy, and that's okay. Software development is hard, and as long as you treat it as modular and the components that are behind it, everything is going to work out for you. So some tips that I've learned just myself and working with my team, working with customers and startups just like you, is number one, embrace the open source. So there's a lot of different development happening right now. A lot of it from Google in terms of foundation models, Gemini, Gemma, all of the agent builder tools we have and how to plug that into cloud. But on the other side of the fence, in open source, which I absolutely am a huge fan of open source, in Python, PyData, there are a ton of projects. LangChain, LangGraph come up a lot, but there are so many more. There are open source tools for automating workflows, open source tools for chatbot front ends, embeddings, so many cool things. So embrace open source, just like 10 years ago.
Hold on. So keep in mind, guys, open source is about an opinion, right? It's not that something that everybody has to follow. If you think that your company needs to be open source, it's more of perspective. Okay, it is not a absolute truth that opening a source is a good thing, right? So some people, they don't want to do open source because if you do open source, other people will copy your system, right? So it also has also financial implications, right? Would I open source my code? I mean, it's based on a personal decision. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. If you want the world to enjoy your code, that's fine. It's your perspective, but not everyone has to do open source.
When it was not possible, or I guess I should say, just like the data science industry, which really took off 10 or 15 years ago, it's still today not possible to buy an off-the-shelf data science platform. And that's why Google Cloud exists and development tools exist so that you can build it. So remember that open source plays super well with all of the things I just mentioned in Google Cloud, whether it's the generative AI column or some other column where you need to bring that functionality in. Combine tools when possible. So I think that when you're looking at how to flow information through your agent or your app, it can be really easy to just.
So I just want to tell my viewers that, so remember, when he's giving his opinions, okay? It doesn't mean that, he's not telling you the process, how the process works, okay? Okay, if somebody's saying, 1 + 1 = 2, that's not an opinion, that's a fact. He's telling you a fact. But you have to make sure you differentiate a fact from opinion, okay? So these opinions can be are relative. So depending on your knowledge, on your experience, you can have your own opinion too. So opinions are not a basis for opinion are malleable, right? You can change them. So it's not like the true absolute truth that you have to run with it. So everybody they can have their own opinion based on their experiences. So just keep in mind, especially when you are watching a course or somebody teaching you something, you got to make sure you got to know the difference between the opinion that they're giving you and the knowledge and the facts that they're giving you.
Just say, I'm going to throw this really hard problem at Gemini and whatever comes out, that's it. Remember that there are tools that existed before Gemini. So the BigQuery, Imagine, Google Workspace, use these tools alongside so that you're not getting less effective results from Gemini. And finally, one of my favorite mantras is use modular architectures. So if you see a really cool AI agent that has 20 tools and different modalities and phone and text, and you try to reproduce that, you'll probably spend months fighting different things and trying to set it up. Think simpler. Actually think about your existing apps and a very specific problem that you can solve. Work modularly and build up a little toolbox of this is how I solve, this is how I implement retrieval augmented generation. And I guarantee you're going to use that in almost every generative AI app you have. So make it modular. When you think about building your agents, remember microservices. We're really just building little microservice agents that are working together. Last but not least is evaluation and quality. This is so important. I don't want to leave you with that, even that tiny stack, because evaluation and quality determines, is this going to be useful for your customer? Is this going to be helpful to your employees? Or is this actually going to solve technical and business problems? To do this, we could probably have a whole session, and there will be a session in AI Startup School about evaluation. But quick tips while you're starting out: define metrics that matter, test with your users, and monitor all the things. And there's a lot of really good tracing and observability tools out there, both at Google and in open source, that can help with this problem. But just remember, even if you're building a super simple app, start testing on day one. Have one test case of an input and an output that you like or don't like, and start building out that. That's going to be the most important thing, so you don't get lost in the architectures and the stacks like I have in the last couple of years. So to take us out, let's talk about resources and next steps as you're getting ready to onboard into AI Startup School. I'll leave you with 3 links and QR codes here. The leftmost one is to sign up for AI Startup School, which if you haven't already, you can go ahead and do that and join our multi-week program with sessions that are going to dig into a lot of these concepts. In the middle is a link to GitHub Notebooks. This is a repository that's maintained by the team I work on, developer relations in AI and ML. And here you can find over 200 sample notebooks, everything from low-level tuning to high-level multimodal recommendation engines. My advice is this is all openly licensed. You can go here, try it out, and take that code and absolutely use it for your startup. That's what it's there for. We've spent the weeks and even months of maintenance on these, so you don't have to. Go grab one of the use cases off of that big blog post and grab one of our GitHub notebooks, and you'll be up and running in no time. Finally, I want to point you to our Google Cloud community. It's a great place to go meet other folks like you, working at startups, developers, just trying to solve these problems. And also people like myself spend time on those forums and love to hear like what's working, what's not working, because we essentially do what you do all day and try to help you make your job better. So with that, thanks so much for joining. I hope you found this useful as an overview of the short list.
Okay. So my final take is very 2 points. It's very simple. If you are an entrepreneur, you are building products, you need to know, you have to know the overview of, you have to have some sort of a general understanding of how all these, products works. And it is important to know that. And especially from financial standpoint, you need to know the cost of APIs, because, if you're building a product and you're running out of money, I think your business is doomed to fail. So you have to keep in mind, especially if if you have people working for you, you need to focus on more of the cost of the APIs, and you have to also have a general knowledge of how all these products, function. And for somebody who wants to work or to build product, right, and work for a company, I think these resources are really important. And what I like about Google and the other companies is they have all these resources for free. You don't have to pay for it. If you are, let's say, if you are struggling to find a job, these resources will help you build your knowledge base and build a product, and you can put it on your resume, and you'll be able to get hired. So take advantage of that. A lot of people that are trying to charge you for things that are completely free online. Okay, so if you are going into technology, take advantage of these courses. They are available for free, and it will really build your resume up. And if your intention is to work for a company, So it's really important to use those resources.